What if I told you that there once existed a book, a scripture once counted among the Bibles of the earliest believers, but one day it vanished, erased from the memory of the Western world, hidden deep within forgotten libraries, buried under dust and centuries, lies a text called the Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis. It was said to have been written not only by the hands of men, but through the voice of angels, those who once stood between heaven and earth to guard the divine order. Within its pages are stories untold, secret conversations between angels and humankind, prophecies of destruction and renewal, and visions of an age when giants still walked upon the earth. I remember the words from Luke chapter 8, verse 17, that nothing is hidden which shall not be revealed, nor anything secret that shall not be made known and come to light. Then why was this book removed from the Bible? What knowledge did it carry that the rulers of faith feared so greatly? According to ancient accounts, when Moses stood upon Mount Sinai, surrounded by the cloud of glory, an angel came forth from the fire and said, "Write down the entire history of the world from creation to the day you lead my people out of Egypt, that future generations may know that all things are appointed according to the law of heaven." The Book of Jubilees tells that every event of mankind unfolds in cycles of 49 years, each called one Jubilee, as though every breath of time has already been measured and recorded in heaven. It is not just history, but a divine blueprint of existence, where the rhythm of heaven shapes the destiny of earth. And perhaps it was this truth, too great and too complete, that caused it to be silenced. For if humanity understood that every season is known, every promise marked, every judgment set within divine time, then fear itself would lose its power. Knowledge would become strength. And strength, when guided by heaven, would challenge every earthly throne. That is why the Book of Jubilees disappeared, erased by decree, surviving only in the Ethiopian Bible, written in the ancient tongue of Ge'ez, a language now only heard in sacred chants. I have traced its fragments through broken Latin and Greek translations, each shard reflecting a flash of the divine as if through a shattered mirror. At night, I sit before the oil lamp, the flame trembling over the ancient letters, and I wonder, if what lies within this book is true, then all of human history is but a reflection of a plan already written in the courts of heaven. Perhaps that is why it was hidden, sealed away until the appointed time. But tonight, as the world grows silent, I open that long-forgotten scroll, and I invite you to listen with me. Let the dust of ages rise. Let the forbidden words breathe again, for within them may lie not only the record of time, but the reflection of our own souls, waiting to awaken to the truth. We were never meant to forget. They called them watchers, the guardians of mankind, appointed from the host of heaven to keep order between the realms. I remember the first time I read their story in the old fragments, and it felt less like history and more like a warning whispered from eternity. In the beginning, they stood radiant, loyal, clothed in light. They watched from the mountains, from the rivers, from the edges of the sky. Their duty was not to rule, but to observe, to protect, to remind mankind that heaven was still near, but closeness to humanity became the seed of their fall. They looked upon men and women, saw beauty in mortal eyes, warmth in mortal touch, and what began as compassion turned into desire. One among them, Samyaza, their leader, gathered 200 of his brethren upon the high peak of Mount Hermon, where the clouds wrapped the summit like a crown. There, he spoke words that changed the course of both heaven and earth. Let us make an oath. He said, let us bind ourselves together in this act, that none of us may turn back from it. And so they swore, binding themselves with a vow that echoed through the mountains. From that moment, heaven lost 200 of its brightest stars. They descended upon the earth, taking wives among the daughters of men. And from their union came a race of giants, the Nephilim, beings of strength beyond measure, but hearts consumed by pride. They were born of heaven's light and earth's corruption, and their presence poisoned creation itself. They devoured the land, enslaved mankind, and filled the world with blood and terror. The cries of the oppressed rose to the throne of the Most High. In the courts of heaven, the archangels mourned. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel stood before the throne and said, Lord of all creation, the earth is dying beneath the weight of sin. The watchers you appointed have betrayed their charge. Then came the command that would shatter the ages, bind the fallen, said the Lord. Cleanse the world that it may live again. Michael led the hosts of heaven in a war not fought with swords of iron, but with decrees of divine judgment. The earth trembled, the sky darkened, and the waters of the deep broke forth. Mountains split, and the sun hid its face. The great flood came not only as punishment, but as purification, a divine reset of creation's order. The Nephilim, towering in arrogance, were swept away by the rising waters. The watchers who fathered them were cast into chains, imprisoned in the abyss until the final day when judgment would be complete. And as the waters receded, the world was quiet once more. Only the ark remained, a single vessel of mercy floating above the ruins of a fallen age. From that silence, a new covenant was born. When I read those words, I felt the weight of that judgment pressing upon my own heart. The story was not only about angels long ago, it was about us. For the same temptation that drew down the watchers lives still within mankind. The desire to reach beyond the boundary set by God, to claim what is forbidden, to replace obedience with curiosity and holiness with pride. The watchers crossed from obedience to rebellion, from guardians to gods, and in doing so they lost everything. I realized then that every sin, every fall, begins not with great evil, but with one small step away from faith. The same voice that whispered to them whispers still to every generation. Take what you desire. No one will know, but heaven always knows, and every broken commandment sends a ripple into eternity. In the Book of Jubilees, it is written that their names were blotted from the record of heaven, that their memory would serve as a warning forever, even though the legend of their power never died. In ancient lands, people built monuments to them, mistaking rebellion for glory. And I wonder, is the world today not repeating their story? We build towers that reach the clouds, craft weapons that shape nations, and chase the illusion that we are our own gods. The watchers fell when they forgot who they served. So will we, if we forget who we belong to? But within that tragedy lies a battle plan for the soul to stand firm against temptation, to fight not with anger, but with obedience, to use faith as our weapon. This is spiritual warfare. This is the war that never ends. For I have seen how the same pattern repeats from age to age. Pride leads to fall. Fall leads to destruction. But repentance leads to deliverance. And so I say to you, do not look upon this story as myth. It is a mirror. Every time we choose purity over corruption, we undo a fragment of the Watcher's rebellion. Every act of faith repairs what arrogance destroyed. The flood that once cleansed the earth now flows through the hearts of those who return to God. Tonight, as I close this part of the tale, I leave you with one question. In this world where shadows rise again, will you stand as a watcher of light or fall as one who forgot his place? And if this story has stirred something within you, let it not end here. Like and share your thoughts, for your voice is not alone. Your presence here means that the words of truth still find a home in the hearts of believers. I have often wondered what kind of child could be chosen to rebuild a world drowned in judgment. Among the old fragments I found the story of Noah, and though the letters were faded and broken, The message shone brighter than gold. It was said that on the night Noah was born, a strange light filled the tent of his parents. The air itself seemed to tremble with holiness. His eyes were as clear as the sky, and his skin carried a faint glow like the dawn after a storm. His father, Lamech, was terrified. He ran to his own father, Methuselah, fearing that this child was not of human blood but something from heaven. After prayer and fasting, Methuselah told him, "Fear not. This is the one chosen by God. The light in his flesh is a mark of the covenant. He will walk with the Lord when the world forgets his name." From that day, Noah was watched with awe. As a child, while other boys played in the fields, he would sit beneath the trees and listen to the wind, as if hearing words beyond the reach of mortal tongue. He memorized the stories of Adam, Enoch, and the early covenants. His memory was like polished bronze, clear and unbroken. When I read this, I realize that purity was not just innocence. It was strength. Noah's heart was a fortress no corruption could breach. The Book of Jubilees says that even as a boy, he prayed not for wealth or favor, but for understanding, for the strength to walk in truth. When the world around him sank into violence and desire, Noah kept his hands clean. He fed the poor, comforted the weak, and built altars from uncut stones, offering thanks for every sunrise. Yet purity has a cost. The wicked mocked him. They said he was mad, wasting his youth in prayer. But Noah did not answer. He knew that silence was a weapon more powerful than argument. For every insult he endured, heaven recorded his patience, and the Lord saw it all. One night, when Noah slept, he dreamed of waters rising. He saw the mountains sink beneath the waves and the stars vanish from the sky. In the dream, a voice spoke, "Be still, for when this world drowns, you will stand upon the new." When he awoke, he was not afraid. He simply bowed and whispered, "Let your will be done." From that moment, his life became a blueprint for deliverance. While others chased pleasures and violence, Noah prepared. He built tools, gathered wood, studied the patterns of the seasons. People laughed, but he continued. The day came when God spoke again, commanding him to build the ark. In Jubilees, it is said the measurements were revealed by angels. Ach be'am, each curve of the hull was drawn according to heavenly proportion, a mirror of the divine order itself. As I read those words, I felt the rhythm of obedience pulse through the page. Noah did not question. He acted. Faith became his battle plan. Obedience his weapon. Every hammer strike against the wood was a declaration against chaos. And when the first raindrops fell, the mockers turned to panic. They remembered his warnings, but it was too late. The flood was not only water, it was truth unleashed. The world drowned in its own corruption, and only Noah, his family, and the living creatures in the ark were preserved. I paused there, realizing that the ark was more than a vessel. It was a symbol of the human heart that chooses to obey when others rebel. Each of us is called to build such an ark within. In our time, storms still rise. The waters now are not of rain, but of deception, greed, and despair. Yet the command is the same. Build, prepare, stand firm. For faith is the only wood that floats above the flood of this world. I think of how the watchers fell by lust, but Noah rose by discipline. Where angels disobeyed, man submitted, and that submission became salvation. It is no wonder that the Lord blessed him to begin anew. The Book of Jubilees says God spoke to him after the flood, saying, "You and your sons shall plant vineyards, build cities, and renew the covenant of earth." Each seed he planted was not just grain or vine, but hope reborn. The rainbow was the signature of that promise, a sign that even after wrath, mercy reigns. When I close my eyes and picture that quiet sky after the storm, I feel the stillness that follows repentance. It is as if the whole earth breathes again, clean and forgiven. And I ask myself, what flood must come to wash away our own generation's sin? Perhaps the storms we face now are not curses but invitations, calling us to build again, to listen again, to become once more the faithful children of the covenant. For the story of Noah is not only about survival, it is about transformation. Every hammer, every prayer, every act of obedience was his victory. And so it can be ours. The question is simple. When the flood comes, will you be ready? If this story has moved you, let your faith speak, share your thoughts. For when believers unite in purpose, the sound of their prayers becomes the new ark, rising above the waters of this world. When I reached the story of Sinai, I felt the ground tremble beneath my own heart. It was not only a mountain of stone, it was the place where heaven bent low enough for man to hear. The Book of Jubilees tells that when Moses climbed into the fire and cloud, time itself slowed, days became nights and nights became days, until his spirit was stripped of every human noise. There in the silence, he was shown not only the 10 Commandments, but the entire pattern of creation, the divine order hidden behind the visible world. The angel who spoke to him said, "Write these words, for they are the eternal law, the blueprint of heaven made flesh upon the earth." Every law given on that mountain was a weapon forged for spiritual warfare. The Sabbath was not mere rest. It was resistance against chaos. The law of marriage was not control. It was protection of sacred covenant. The feast days were not rituals. They were reminders that every season of life is appointed. As I read those verses, I realize how the commandments were not burdens but coordinates, guiding the soul through enemy territory toward deliverance. For the enemy does not always come with sword or fire. He comes with distraction, desire, and the whisper that obedience is bondage. But the law says otherwise. Obedience is freedom. Submission is power. Moses stood on that peak for 40 days, neither eating nor drinking, and the fire of God did not consume him because his will had already surrendered. The Book of Jubilees says that the mountain itself became holy because heaven touched it. Angels surrounded it in 7 circles, singing words no man could translate. Their song was the architecture of eternity. The stones themselves glowed, recording what the angel revealed. The appointed feasts, the sacred years, the measure of time, 49 years make one jubilee, and each jubilee marks a new cycle in the divine rhythm. The same pattern that governed Noah's flood now defined Israel's future. It struck me that God does not act in random chaos. He builds according to design. Every commandment is a beam in the structure of his covenant. Every rule, a column holding the weight of divine order. Yet when Moses descended, his face shone so bright that the people could not look upon him. They feared the light because it revealed their darkness. And is it not the same now? When truth confronts comfort, the heart recoils. Humanity still hides behind its golden calves, behind the idols of power, pleasure, and self. We want blessings without obedience, freedom without responsibility, grace without transformation. But law and mercy are not enemies. They are 2 edges of the same sword. The law reveals the disease. Mercy brings the cure. Together they form the weapon that crushes the serpent. As I studied, I saw the pattern again and again. The watchers fell because they broke the law of heaven. Noah was saved because he obeyed. Israel survived because of covenant. The same law that binds heaven to earth is the same blueprint that binds man to salvation. When Moses placed the tablets into the ark, it was not just stone. He carried He carried the strategy of redemption. Every battle since then, whether against armies or temptations, has followed that plan: to remember, to obey, to stand. I imagine standing beside him at the foot of Sinai, hearing the thunder roll like a heartbeat from the sky. The people trembled, but Moses lifted his hands and said, "Fear not, the Lord has come to prove you, that his fear may remain with you, so you do not sin." Those words still echo, "Fear not," for fear of God is not terror. It is clarity. It reminds us that we are not our own masters, that there is order even in the storm. The blueprint of heaven is not a set of rules carved in stone. It is a living rhythm written upon the heart. When we walk in it, we walk in harmony with creation itself. I have seen men try to live without law, and they call it freedom, but their freedom ends in chains. The law is the language of heaven, and only those who learn it can hear the music behind all things. That is why Sinai still matters. It was there that God taught man the art of spiritual warfare, not to fight flesh, but to conquer the unseen. The true enemy is not in the valley or the city. It is in the will that refuses to bow, and the weapon against it is obedience. Each time you resist evil, you rebuild Sinai within your soul. Each time you honor the covenant, you raise that mountain again before the eyes of the world. The Book of Jubilees ends that chapter saying that heaven and earth witness the covenant, and whoever keeps it walks in the light of the angel. I close the scroll and whisper to myself, perhaps the true tablet of stone is the heart that refuses to forget. So when the voice of the world calls you to break what God has built, I remember Sinai. Remember the blueprint. For every commandment you keep, you strengthen the wall of light around your soul. And that wall, my friend, is how we win the unseen war. I remember the story of Sodom not as distant legend, but as the echo of a warning that still burns through time. The Book of Jubilees tells that the cities of the plain were once gardens, watered like Eden, rich in grain and laughter. Travelers rested beneath their vines, and the night air was sweet with promise. Yet beneath the beauty grew rot. The people forgot the law of heaven. They turned abundance into indulgence, blessing into weapon. They learned to call good evil and evil good. Justice became mockery, purity became weakness, and pleasure their only God. I read those lines and felt the chill of recognition. For our own age sings the same song. The sin of Sodom was not lust alone. It was rebellion against the order of creation. Men took what was not theirs, mocked covenant, and made desire a throne. They worshipped the body while starving the soul. And when prophets warned them, they laughed. The more they were told of judgment, the louder they feasted. Yet even in their darkness, mercy stood at the door. 3 strangers came to Abraham under the oak of Mamre. They spoke with him as friends, but carried the weight of heaven in their words. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Said the Lord. For his compassion was known, and his heart was pure. Abraham pleaded, if there are 50 righteous, will you spare the city? Then 45, then 30, then 10. He begged for mercy, and heaven listened. But there were none. That was the measure of their fall, that not even 10 remained who remembered God. The angels came to Sodom, and Lot met them at the gate. He offered them bread and shelter, a flicker of light in a city of flame. But when night fell, the streets filled with shouts. The men of Sodom demanded the strangers be brought out to them. Lot pleaded, but they pressed harder, and the door trembled beneath their fists. The angels struck them with blindness, yet even blind they grope for sin. Such is the madness of rebellion, to reach for darkness, even when the eyes can no longer see. The Book of Jubilees says that at dawn, the angels led Lot and his family by the hand and commanded, do not look back behind them. fire fell. It was not simple fire, but the burning of heaven's grief, a rain of purification that turned the green valley into a sea of salt. Abraham rose early and looked toward the plain, and the smoke rose like the smoke of a furnace. I imagine him standing there in silence, the wind carrying the taste of ashes. Judgment is never easy to watch. It is a mirror held up to every generation that dares to forget. I once thought this story was only about the past, but now I see it is prophecy. We too have built our own Sodoms, not of stone but of ideology. We legalize what heaven forbids, mock what is holy, and celebrate what destroys us. We are proud of our tolerance, yet intolerant of truth. We demand freedom but chain ourselves to sin. We rename rebellion as progress and call it light. But the fire still waits. The pattern of judgment is written into the very bones of the world. When corruption ripens, the harvest comes, and yet even now, mercy still whispers. Like Abraham, we can intercede like Lot. We can shelter the light. The question is whether we will. I often think of Lot's wife, the one who looked back. Her heart was still in Sodom, though her feet had left it. She became a pillar of salt, a monument to divided loyalty. The lesson is clear. Deliverance requires separation. You cannot carry the fire of heaven in one hand and the ashes of sin in the other. Each of us must choose which city we will belong to, for every age stands between Sodom and Zion. In spiritual warfare, Sodom is the enemy's territory, and the battle is fought within the soul. Every time you resist the temptation to conform, you reclaim a piece of ground for the kingdom of God. Every prayer, every act of righteousness is like water cooling the flames. But indifference is fuel for the fire. I have seen men who call themselves believers but live as if God will never act again. They forget that mercy does not cancel justice, it delays it. The clock still ticks toward the hour of reckoning. Yet there is hope. In the ashes of Sodom, a new nation was born. From Lot's lineage came Moab and Ammon, and though their stories are troubled, from that same bloodline would one day come Ruth, and from Ruth, David, and from David, Christ. Even judgment becomes soil for redemption. Such is the mystery of grace. I close my eyes and pray that we learn before the fire falls again. If you have ears to hear, let this story stir your conscience. Stand for holiness, even when the world laughs. Be like Abraham who prayed, like Lot who protected, not like the crowd who mocked. And if these words reach you tonight, let them be your call to arms. For this is not just a tale of destruction. It is a battle plan for deliverance. Comment your thoughts below. Let faith speak louder than silence, because your voice, joined with others, can still stay the hand of wrath. The prophecies recorded in the Book of Jubilees shook me more than any storm I have read in Scripture. They were not written as riddles but as warnings, clear as thunder, yet ignored by generations who thought themselves wiser than heaven. The angel who spoke to Moses revealed that mankind would one day alter the order of time itself. They would change the calendar, shift the holy days, and forget the rhythm that binds heaven and earth. The festivals appointed by God would be replaced by the inventions of men. And because of that, and confusion would spread like shadow across the nations. The sun would not rise in joy. The moon would mourn. And the appointed times would lose their harmony. As I read those words, I felt the truth of them pressing upon our age. The world has lost its rhythm. Time now serves greed, not grace. We move without pause, measure our worth by speed and noise, and call that progress. But the angel warned that when time loses its holiness, creation itself begins to unravel. Jubilees speaks of an age of disorder. When kingdoms devour one another, when the strong rewrite truth, and when faith becomes a relic. I turned the page and found a line that seemed written for our century. It said, In those days, the hearts of men shall grow proud in their wisdom, and they shall worship the works of their own hands. Technology, wealth, and pride have replaced altars and prayer. We build towers of data instead of towers of stone. And yet the arrogance is the same. We have entered the prophecy without knowing it. The book also foretells plagues, earthquakes, and wars as symptoms of spiritual disease. They are not random, but responses, echoes of imbalance. When men violatus divine order, the world itself convulses. The angel said that even the beasts and seasons will rebel when men forget their covenant. The rains will not come, the soil will not yield, and nations will turn against their own. Reading that, I felt the chill of recognition. The earth trembles, fires consume forests, floods devour cities, and we call it climate. But perhaps the climate of the soul has collapsed first. Every natural disaster mirrors a moral one. Jubilees is not a doomsday text. It is a plea for repentance. The angel told Moses that those who remember the ancient calendar, who honor the true Sabbath and keep the appointed times, will remain under divine protection. They will stand like islands of light in a sea of confusion. I closed my eyes and prayed that I might understand what that means in my time. Perhaps to keep the calendar is not merely to mark days, but to keep the heart aligned with heaven's rhythm. Topose, to rest, to remember that life is sacred. The prophecy also speaks of nations that would rise in rebellion against Israel, of a time when truth would be sold and teachers would twist scripture for gain. It says there will come a generation that calls falsehood revelation and revelation superstition. I could not deny that these words have come alive around us. Preachers chase fame, governments trade morality for power, and believers grow weary of discernment. The angel warned that in such times, only those anchored in the word will not be swept away. I read further and found hope hidden in the warning. After the age of confusion, a remnant will awaken. They will rediscover the lost books, uncover hidden manuscripts, and restore what was forgotten. I smiled at that line because it felt like a message to those of us who still search. Maybe our generation's hunger for truth is the fulfillment of that very prophecy. Every time someone opens the Book of Jubilees or the Book of Enoch, heaven's silence breaks a little more. The angel said, in the last days, wisdom shall return to the righteous, and they shall understand what was sealed. That means the forbidden knowledge was not meant to stay forbidden forever. It was reserved for a time when faith would need armor, when light must enter enemy territory. I see now that prophecy is not prediction but preparation. It is the battle plan of heaven handed to the faithful before the war. The storms, the plagues, the confusion are not meant to destroy us, but to discipline us, to drive us back to the rhythm of divine time. I felt an urgency rise within me. These are not the days to sleep. These are the days to sharpen our spiritual weapons, to align our hearts with the heavenly calendar again. When the world says there is no truth, we must be the proof that truth still lives. When the world mocks obedience, we must stand taller, not in pride, but in clarity. The Book of Jubilees ends its prophecies with this promise that after darkness, light shall be revealed sevenfold, and the righteous shall shine like the sun before the face of God. I hold on to that as a soldier holds his banner in the storm. The future is not hopeless. It is holy ground disguised as chaos. I ask you now, if you feel the tremor of these prophecies in your own heart, will you ignore them or prepare? This is not fear speaking, it is faith calling. Comment what you see unfolding in your life, for your testimony might be the next verse in this living prophecy. When I came to the story of Pharaoh, I felt the ground shift beneath the words. It was no longer myth, but war. The Book of Jubilees says that Egypt was not just a kingdom of stone and river. It was the heart of human pride, a throne built upon the backs of the oppressed. Pharaoh believed himself immortal, a god of flesh ruling the Nile. Yet even he was a pawn within the greater design. God had already written his name into the blueprint of judgment. The call began in a desert when Moses, a shepherd exiled and forgotten, stood before a bush that burned yet was not consumed. The voice that came from the fire was not thunder but purpose. Go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Moses trembled, but obedience turned fear into fire. Each step he took toward Egypt was a march into enemy territory. When he stood before Pharaoh, the court shone with gold, but the air smelled of decay. The king laughed. Who is this Lord that I should obey his voice? He knew not that he had already declared war on heaven. The first plague came like a trumpet. The Nile turned to blood. The water that sustained Egypt became the weapon that judged it. The people cried, but Pharaoh hardened his heart. The second plague rose from the mud, frogs covering the palace. A parody of abundance turned to corruption. Then came gnats, flies, and disease, each one striking the idols of Egypt one by one. The Book of Jubilees records that the plagues were not random but targeted. Each plague dismantled a god of Egypt, showing that the Lord alone rules over every element. The magicians tried to imitate the miracles but soon confessed, this is the finger of God. Still Pharaoh would not yield. Pride blinded him more than darkness ever could. Then came hail mingled with fire, and the crops of Egypt burned. Locusts followed, devouring what remained. The land that once overflowed now starved, yet even then Pharaoh whispered lies of surrender, promising freedom, then withdrawing it. I can almost see Moses standing before him, weary but resolute. He knew this was not a battle of man against man, but of truth against delusion. Each time Pharaoh defied the command, the weight of divine justice increased. The ninth plague came, darkness thick as cloth, a shadow so deep that no light could pierce it. For 3 days Egypt sat still, and in that silence heaven waited. Then came the final blow. The death of the firstborn, the cry that rose that night reached every threshold, from palace to prison. There was not a house without grief. Pharaoh's own son lay still. And at last the king broke. Go, he said, take your people and your God with you. It was victory, but victory bought with tears. Yet in that night of death, there was life. The Israelites were told to mark their doors with the blood of the Lamb. When the destroyer passed through the land, he saw the blood and moved on. That mark became the first declaration of deliverance, even though that blood speaks. It reminds me that faith is the line between ruin and redemption. When I read this story, I saw more than ancient plagues. I saw a battle plan for every believer. The same enemy that enslaved Israel still whispers in modern hearts, saying, you do not need to obey. You are your own God. But the same voice that thundered through Egypt still calls us to freedom. Let my people go is not just history. It is command for every generation trapped in bondage. The plagues were judgments, yes, but also revelations. They showed that every false power will eventually face exposure. The Nile, symbol of human control, turned to blood to show that life without God becomes death. The darkness revealed what happens when pride eclipses truth. Every plague was both punishment and parable. When I look at our world now, I see new pharaohs rising, systems that enslave souls instead of bodies, leaders who mock righteousness, nations that bow to idols of money and pleasure. Yet the same God still sends signs. The shaking of economies, the unrest of nations, the storms that defy reason, these are not coincidences. They are warnings, and just as before, a remnant is being called to leave Egypt to walk out of compromise and into covenant. The journey will not be easy. The wilderness always follows deliverance, but freedom is worth the desert. Pharaoh's army still chases, but the sea still parts. The hand of God has not changed. I think often of that moment when the Red Sea split and the waters rose like walls of glass. Israel walked through on dry ground, carrying the bones of their fathers and the promise of a new dawn. When the Egyptians followed, the sea returned and buried them. The greatest empire on earth drowned in its arrogance, and from that silence rose a song, "The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation." That song is the anthem of every soul that has seen deliverance. I sing it now in my heart as I write. The battle with Pharaoh was not the end. It was the pattern. Every trial we face is a plague against the false gods we serve. Every deliverance, a reminder that heaven still rules. So I ask you, which Pharaoh commands your life today? What chains have you called comfort? Let this story be your exodus. Declare your freedom. And if it speaks to you, write it below. Let your words be the modern song of deliverance. For together we are the army that walks out of Egypt and into promise. The wilderness is not a punishment. It is a proving ground. I learned this when I read the account of the 40 years that followed the deliverance from Egypt. The people who had walked through the sea on dry ground now walked through endless sand. They had seen miracles that shattered kingdoms, yet faith faded like dew under the sun. The Book of Jubilees says that God led them through the desert not to destroy them, but to teach them what freedom means. For freedom without discipline is only another form of slavery. The pillar of cloud moved by day, the fire by night. Yet the human heart still trembled. Hunger came, thirst followed, and the people cried, "Why did you bring us here to die?" They had left Egypt in body, but Egypt still lived in their minds. I can almost hear their voices echoing across the ages of the same complaint that rises in us when the journey grows long. But the desert is the blueprint of purification. It strips away comfort so that only truth remains. The Lord provided manna each morning, white as frost, soft as mercy. Each person gathered what they needed. No more, no less. Those who tried to hoard it found it rotted by dawn. It was a lesson written in bread that faith must be renewed daily. We cannot store yesterday's obedience. We must wake each day and trust again. Yet the people grumbled. They wanted the taste of Egypt, the onions and meat of bondage. They traded gratitude for nostalgia. I realized then that the enemy does not need to drag us back to Egypt if he can make us miss it. He whispers that slavery was easier, that obedience is too hard, that holiness costs too much. And so many give up just before the promised land, but those who endure find strength no battle can take away. Moses climbed the mountain again, seeking counsel, and the Lord said, "This generation shall not enter my rest because they believe me not." The words struck me like thunder. Faith is not words or rituals. It is endurance. 40 years. 1 year for each day they doubted when they spied the land. Even so, mercy walked with them. Their shoes did not wear out. Their clothes did not fade. And water flowed from the rock. In the night, the sky burned with stars. And each star was a promise. When I meditate on this, I see that every believer must cross their own desert. God allows it so that what was false in us may die. Pride dies there. Fear dies there. Self-reliance dies there. Only faith survives. The desert is the training ground of warriors. No one enters Canaan without scars, but no one who trusts the process comes out empty. The Book of Jubilees records that even the angels watched their journey, for it mirrored the conflict between heaven and hell. The desert was enemy territory, and every complaint was a breach in the defense. Yet every prayer was a fortress rebuilt. I remember one verse that pierced me deeply. The Lord walked among them unseen, testing their hearts to see who would remember his name. That is the warfare of the Spirit. Unseen but decisive. Many fell, yet a remnant learned the rhythm of obedience. They learned that faith is not proven by victory but by perseverance. I think of Joshua and Caleb, the two who refused to surrender to fear. They saw the same giants others saw, but they measured them against the size of God, not against themselves. That vision is what carried them through when all others turned back. The wilderness reveals what you truly believe. When there is no comfort, faith becomes either real or nothing. And so the 40 years were not wasted. They were the forging of a nation that would one day bear the word. Each grain of sand marked the lesson. Each sunrise, renewed covenant. When I look at my own life, I see deserts between every promise. We pray for destiny, but forget that destiny must be proven. If you are walking through such a season now, take courage. The desert is not your grave. It is your classroom. God has not abandoned you. He is teaching you how to fight without seeing, to worship without reward, to stand when no one else will. That is the kind of faith that parts seas and moves mountains. I think often of the last morning before they entered Canaan, the old generation gone, a new one standing on the edge of promise. The wind carried the scent of milk and honey from across the river. Moses stood upon the hill, old yet radiant. He looked upon the land he would not enter, but his eyes were filled with peace. He had seen the pattern complete. He knew that every tear shed in the desert had watered the soil of the promise. That is how faith works. The barren ground becomes fertile through endurance. I close my eyes and imagine myself among them, sand beneath my feet, sky blazing with hope. The voice of God still speaks the same command. Go forward. Do not fear the wilderness. For those who walk in faith will find that even the desert blooms. If this word reaches your heart, do not keep silent. Share your journey below, for your testimony is water for another traveler's soul. Together we cross the desert. Together we fight the unseen war until we stand upon the promised ground, where faith becomes sight. The morning after the storm, I remember how the desert shone like glass. The people woke to find the ground covered in white flakes, soft as frost, glimmering in the dawn. They asked one another, "What is it?" And Moses answered, "It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." The Book of Jubilees says the manna was not earthly food, but a gift from the treasury of heaven, a taste of eternity sent to sustain mortal flesh. Each morning it appeared. Each evening it melted. They could not store it for tomorrow, for the command was clear: gather what you need for today. It was a test of trust, the discipline of daily dependence. When I read that, I felt conviction rise within me. For how often do we hoard what God meant to be fresh? We cling to yesterday's miracles, yesterday's revelations, and find that they rot when kept too long. Faith must breathe. It must be gathered anew each dawn. The people soon grew weary of the manna. They called it light food, craving meat and spice. They forgot that this bread was not just nourishment, but presence. Each grain was a reminder that heaven still watched over them. But gratitude fades quickly when the heart forgets hunger. The Lord sent quail until it poured from their nostrils. And their greed became judgment. I thought of how ingratitude still poisons our generation. We have more than any people before us, yet the soul starves. We demand signs while ignoring the daily miracles scattered around us. Breath, sunrise, forgiveness. These are our manna, yet we call them ordinary. In the Book of Jubilees, it is written that the manna ceased only when the people entered the land and ate the fruit of promise. That detail pierced me. Provision is always seasonal. God gives manna in the wilderness, but expects harvest in Canaan. The problem is that many never move forward. They wish to live forever in yesterday's provision. They confuse comfort with calling. Gratitude, I realize, is not emotion but movement. To be grateful is to keep walking. I imagine standing with them in the early morning light, bending to gather the flakes, feeling the coolness against my fingers. The taste, they said, was like honey on fresh bread, a sweetness born of obedience. Every bite was a sermon. God will provide, and yet by nightfall, complaints returned. It was never about the bread. It was about the heart. The manna exposed what Egypt had left inside them. Freedom had fed their bodies, but not yet renewed their minds. Gratitude is the weapon that silences rebellion. It is the song that confuses the enemy. In spiritual warfare, thankfulness is not weakness. It is shield and sword. When you thank God in scarcity, you declare that heaven still rules your wilderness. When you praise in pain, you deny hell its victory. I have seen men lose everything, yet remain grateful, and they walk with a strength that terrifies the darkness. The manna still falls for such souls, though not as bread but as peace. In my own life, I have tasted that peace in nights of fear when all seemed lost. Provision came quietly, not in wealth but in presence. The same God who fed a nation in the sand still feeds hearts in the storm. I remember one evening reading these words by a dim lamp, the oil nearly gone. I felt tired, uncertain of tomorrow. Then a whisper came within me, gather what you have, trust me for the rest. I realized then that manna is not only something that falls, it is something that awakens. Gratitude opens the heavens, complaint closes them. Every thank you is a door in the desert. The Book of Jubilees calls manna the bread of angels, meaning that those who eat it walk in communion with heaven. Gratitude restores that communion. When we give thanks, we align our souls with the rhythm of divine provision. It is the opposite of pride. The antidote to fear, I think of how Jesus, centuries later, broke bread and gave thanks before multiplying it. The same pattern repeats. Thanksgiving precedes miracle. The manna of Jubilees was a prophecy of that greater bread, the one who came down from heaven to give life to the world. When I read that connection, I felt the circle complete. The wilderness was not a curse, but a classroom teaching humanity how to depend on heaven again. Gratitude was the final exam. Those who passed entered rest. Those who failed circled in frustration. And is it not still the same? Our world runs in circles of complaint, always gathering more, yet never satisfied. We have forgotten that the sweetest meal is the one seasoned with thanksgiving. I whisper to myself as I write, Lord, teach me to gather your manna and not despise it. Teach me to see miracle in the ordinary, for gratitude is the doorway to glory. I turn the last page of the chapter and read the closing line. The people ate and were filled, and they blessed the God of heaven who had fed them. That is how I want to live, filled and grateful, not by abundance, but by awareness. And so I ask you, what manna has God placed in your path that you have overlooked? What daily mercy have you mistaken for coincidence? Pause, look around, and gather. Let your words of thanks be the offering of this day. If this story speaks to you, share it, or write your gratitude below. For every testimony of thankfulness multiplies the bread of faith. Together, we will feed a world starving for wonder. Among all the scrolls I have read, none have stirred the spirit like the ones men tried to erase. They are called the forbidden books, but I call them the forgotten witnesses. The Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, Tobit, Baruch, and the Vision of Ezra, each of them holds a piece of the divine puzzle, a glimpse of the greater plan of God. Yet one by one they vanished from the canon. sealed away by councils and kingdoms that claim to guard the truth. I do not write this in rebellion, but in reverence, for truth does not fear examination. When I traced their history, I found a pattern. Every book removed carried within it a vision too vast, too dangerous for the age that followed. Enoch spoke of angels and watchers, of the fall of light into darkness, of divine justice that no empire could escape. Jubilees revealed the order of time itself, a heavenly calendar that placed God's rhythm above the rule of kings. Baruch and Ezra cried against corruption, foretelling the collapse of worldly power. These were not myths, they were mirrors. And the rulers of men do not like mirrors that reveal their reflection. The councils that formed the canon claimed unity, but unity built on silence is only another form of control. I imagine the scribes debating by candlelight, the air thick with incense and fear. Some argued for truth, others for power. The result was a canon polished and shortened, a flame trimmed to fit the lamp of empire. The forbidden books became enemy territory, yet their words survived in the shadows, preserved by the Ethiopian fathers who refused to bow to Rome. Their faith became the ark for these lost treasures in their tongue. The old languages still breathe. I once read an ancient note that said, "The Lord hides his secrets not to deny them, but to protect those not ready to bear them." That line freed me. Perhaps the removal of these texts was not the victory of darkness, but the mercy of time. For knowledge without faith becomes arrogance, and mystery without holiness breeds idolatry. But now the age has come when the sealed must be unsealed. We live in a world drowning in information, yet starving for wisdom. The rediscovery of these books is not rebellion, it is renewal. I opened Enoch and found warnings that match our headlines. The watchers taught forbidden arts, corrupting mankind with pride and power. Today we call them technology and progress. Yet the pattern is the same. Enoch wept for the world that would not listen. I wept with him. Jubilees whispered of a time when men would change the times and the laws, and I see it now. Calendars rewritten, seasons blurred, truth replaced by convenience. The forbidden books are not forgotten. They are fulfilled. They rise again because the prophecy demands it. Each one carries a battle plan for the soul. Enoch teaches vigilance. Jubilees teaches discipline. Tobit teaches mercy. Baruch teaches repentance. Ezra teaches endurance. Together they form a shield against deception. Perhaps that is why they were hidden, because their wisdom makes slaves into soldiers. When the world loses the map of holiness, these books draw it again. I remember one night reading the words of Enoch under a flickering lamp. The rain beat against the window like drums, and the letters seemed to breathe. In that moment I understood that truth cannot be banned. You can chain a book, but not the word that breathes through it. You can silence a prophet, but not the fire that kindled him. The forbidden books are like seeds buried deep. When the storm comes, they rise again. I believe we are living in that awakening. The Spirit is stirring old scroll, calling a new generation to search not for novelty but for depth. These writings challenge the comfortable, awaken the sleeping, and prepare the faithful for battle. For this is warfare of the mind and heart. To know is to fight. To remember is to resist. The enemy thrives in ignorance. That is why every rediscovered word feels like reclaiming stolen territory. I think of how Jesus himself quoted Enochian thought when he spoke of angels and the elect. The apostles read these texts. The early church lived by them. Only later did fear and politics veil them. But heaven does not lose what man hides. When I close my eyes, I see a library of light beyond time, shelves lined with every word God has ever inspired. Nothing is lost there. Every truth waits for its appointed hour to return. And maybe that hour is now. As I finish this part of the journey, I do not seek to convince you of history, but to awaken hunger. Read, test, discern, pray. Do not accept or reject out of fear. Seek. For those who knock, the door will open. Perhaps the forbidden books were never truly forbidden. Perhaps they were invitations waiting for hearts brave enough to read them. If this message stirs you, write below what truth you have rediscovered. For together we are rebuilding the library of faith, one testimony at a time. All journeys lead here to the moment of decision. I have walked through fire and flood in the pages of these ancient words, and I have seen the pattern that runs beneath them all. It is not the story of angels or kings or prophets alone. It is the story of the soul, of how every age must choose between light and shadow. The Book of Jubilees, the law, the wilderness, the manna, the flood, the fall, each of them was a rehearsal for this hour. The blueprint of faith has never changed. God calls, man resists, judgment falls, mercy returns, again and again, until the final deliverance. As I write these last words, I feel the weight of centuries pressing upon my chest, a whisper from the same voice that spoke to the prophet saying, stand firm, the war has never ended, it only changes form. In our time, the swords are not of iron, but of ideology. The idols are not carved from stone, but from comfort and screens. The enemy no longer roars, he persuades, his weapon is distraction. His fortress is apathy. And yet the call of heaven is still the same. Put on the armor, remember the covenant, fight not with hatred, but with holiness. We are not spectators in this age. We are soldiers stationed in enemy territory. Every prayer is a strike against darkness. Every act of kindness, a breach in the walls of despair. The world will mock it, call it weakness. But heaven measures strength in surrender. The more we yield to God, the more unshakable we become. Deliverance is not escape, it is endurance. I think of Noah building his ark under ridicule, Moses standing before Pharaoh with nothing but a staff, Abraham pleading for a city already doomed. Each fought the same invisible war we fight now. Their victories were not in outcome but in obedience. That is the secret of every faithful warrior, to keep standing when reason says fall, to keep believing when silence stretches too long, to keep loving when hate feels easier. This is the battle plan written across the ages. Faith as shield, gratitude as weapon, obedience as armor, hope as banner. When these unite, no darkness can stand. The Book of Jubilees calls those who remember the covenant sons of light, marked not by symbol but by steadfastness. That is what I pray to be, and what I pray you become. Do not fear the chaos that surrounds us. Every empire that rose in arrogance has fallen. Every lie that claimed eternity has crumbled. Only truth remains, patient and unbroken. The same spirit that hovered over the waters at creation now hovers over this generation, waiting for a word of faith to rise from human lips. Speak that word. Say yes to the call. Build your altar. Raise your standard. And let your life become the sermon. The time for silence has passed. The time for battle has come. I end this journey where it began, with a question that burns like dawn. When the scrolls are opened and the armies of heaven march again, where will you stand? On which side of the blueprint will your name be written? The answer is not decided by prophecy but by choice. Choose light. Choose truth. Choose the God who still writes history in the hearts of those who refuse to bow. And if these words awaken something in you, let it be your declaration. Write it, speak it, live it. For we are not readers of an old story. We are its continuation. The war is still holy, and the victory still belongs to the faithful.